Hi, I'm Will Howard, and I'm going to tell you a story about an American hero, an unsung hero who lived right here in Talbot County on Maryland's Eastern Shore. You'll notice that I'm right beside the sign for Unionville Road, and Unionville is a village that's very close to here. And the man who made it possible for that village to exist and 18 people, slaves, to gain their freedom. We've gained special access to this private property in order to tell you the story about this 400-acre property started back by King George with the Stamp Act in 1669. The name of the property is Lombardy. We're with Tom Lane, who is the fourth generation family member that actually owned this property.
Correct. Hi, Will. How are you?
I'm doing fine. Tell me about this building.
This building, this was originally a part of the original house that was here, probably built in the early 1700s. The pictures that I have of this show that it was a larger building. This wing was a larger building, but the original house stood in this direction off of that structure.
Let's talk about land grants. And land grants, as I remember history in school, was when the King George awarded land grants to people who came over here and did good work for him and sent him back money.
Correct.
Sent him back money. So what they would do is they would put their finger in an ink blotter and they would go over to the map, wherever in the United States, and they would pick a spot and they would put their thumb on it.
The thumb stamp.
The thumb stamp.
Right.
And then that became a land grant.
That's correct. And depending on the scale of the map, it could have been 500 acres, it could have been 5,000 acres, or it could have been 100 acres. So I think the original land grant for Lombardy was closer to around 400 acres, I'm going to say. It grew and shrunk in size as the years went forward.
And the people that owned this property then, what crops did they do? Was it tobacco to trade with England?
Mostly tobacco, yes, to trade with England. But obviously there was corn and everything to be able to live on the property with the animals and so on and so forth. But they, sheep and cows and so on and so forth.
And of course they needed slaves in order to harvest all those crops.
Correct.
And the main transportation back then was the rivers.
Exactly. That's where all of the produce would be shipped out by the rivers, because there were no road systems as we know them today.
Easton back then was an Indian trail.
Correct.
Well, we're going to get around to the slaves. The real significant story of this property deals with slaves, and later in Emancipation Proclamation. And we're going to get to that story, but before we do, let's take a tour around. We're going to walk over towards the house so we can see it, and we're going to go on inside and take a peek around. Okay. It's a rare glimpse of real historic.
Yeah, this is a rare house in that it's not, although this is the oldest portion of the house, this is not that old. This part of the house was built in 1928.
Let's walk over so we can see it. Now this is the front of the house. The back.
That's always, in Talbot County, as you know, that's always an argument, because is the front of the house the riverside, or is the front of the house the driveway?
Well, the front of the house is where the mailman knocks. Your great-grandfather built this house, correct?
My great-grandfather built this house in 1928, that's correct.
What did he do for a living at the time?
He was an attorney.
Really?
And really he was an attorney in Baltimore. He was also the chief financial officer for USF&G.
Well, that helps.
And as well as one, I think the second vice president, and then became the first vice president of USF&G.
That's terrific. Well, let's take a look inside. Oh, and then his name was Bartlett, correct?
John Kemp Bartlett, that's correct. Yes.
Now, the word Kemp and Bartlett are old names. As a matter of fact, I believe I've seen the name Bartlett in the courthouse statue to the Confederate boy. Is that correct?
That is correct, yes.
So that meant that he fought in it, not died, right?
Correct, yes. The Talbot boys?
Yes.
Yes, that's correct, yes.
Cool. Let's take a look inside.
Okay, that's great. Go ahead.
Okay, so this is very contemporary.
Correct. Well, the new owners of the property have done extensive renovation on the property. And again, we're in the old 1700s portion of the house. There's a bedroom upstairs, a bedroom here. They lived in this house while they were renovating the main house. So,
But this was the main house back in the 1700s.
this was part of the original main house. As I said outside, the original house went in that direction. It had the octagon cupola attached to it, very Victorian, very, I'm going to say, run down. It was probably the original home that was here, I'm guessing, and the home of Ezekiel Kogel, who was the owner during the Civil War. So, and as I showed you in the pictures, there was a barn off in that direction, an octagonal barn, which is very rare. I don't know why they did octagons. So, very interesting.
Okay, and then this is the bedroom area here?
This is the bedroom area down these steps, so watch your step.
Looks like a house that would be built back in the 1700s.
Well, you can see the thickness of the walls, which you don't see in today's construction at all, whether it's brick or frame. You don't see craftsmanship like this, and still retain the integrity of the structure.
So the typical old Eastern Shore home would be a building that was built with 1 or 2 rooms and they kept extending and extending and extending, called a telescope house.
Correct, and typically with a telescope, the first part of the house was usually the smallest part of the house, and then as they became more established and I want to say wealthier or more capable of having larger sums of money, they would extend the house and the wings would get larger.
Now let's go over and see the new house.
Okay. The new house.
So your father added this portion, this big, large building on when?
The main part of the house was built in 1928. It was my great-grandfather.
And this is the kitchen area here.
This is the current kitchen. The house originally stopped right here, and the new owners have added this lovely eating area.
Breakfast bay.
Breakfast area. The original kitchen was over on that side, and then this was more or less just a pantry. So eating, if it was in the kitchen, was done on the road side of the house, not necessarily the water side of the house. This room was 2 rooms, actually. There was a butler's pantry on the right, and then this was a brick-floored garden room.
Beautiful.
They've done an amazing job converting this back into one space. So now we're going to enter into the formal dining room of the house.
Wow, this looks presidential.
It really is presidential. I think there's at least seats for 24 in this room. And again, it's a typical Eastern Shore home that it goes from, it's 1 room deep and from roadside to waterside.
Now we got a picture there of cows. There were cows here?
There were cows here. My great-grandfather had cows in the fields as you drove up the driveway. And cows and sheep, really, because the sheep were what cut the grass.
And tell me about this mural over here.
The current owners have
Come on over.
this most amazing mural of Miles River. And it shows the sheep grazing in the fields out of Lombardy.
So it's as if we're in the house here looking out over the water.
More or less. It's a change of a little bit. You can see the old stone church, which is up at the bridge. And they very, very playfully painted in their 3 children. There's one under a tree here, there's one flying a kite here, and there's one waving out of the window of the church. So as we leave the front hall, we enter into the formal living room of the house.
Beautiful.
Which you can take a look at the dental work, and all the moldings over the doors are original from 1928, and the new owners have restored them back to their original beauty.
And this French painting, it looks like the Gauffier brothers taking off with their balloon.
It was here when the current owners bought the property, and it was here when the previous owners bought the property. So it was installed, and I would say installed around in the early 1970s, and it's attached to the wall, and it does not come down. So when they did their renovations, they had to encase it, and so it wouldn't get damaged during
I like it.
construction.
I like it. And the all the molding is so
The moldings
fantastic.
are truly spectacular. And as we go into the other hyphen of the house, you'll see the original octagon brick floors from 1928. But again, the original brick floors in the hyphen part of the house,
Just beautiful.
which led into my great-grandfather's, or John Kemp Bartlett's, office.
Wow.
So he,
What a nice study. And tell me about the painting. Is that a...
I know nothing about the painting, but I do know that about the walnut paneling in here actually came from trees, walnut trees on the property, because they a lot of the times they couldn't get lumber or ready supplies of lumber to build a house, so they would set up a mill on the property, and so this walnut paneling actually came from the property, milled on site and installed
Boy, with such craftsmen.
with lots of craftsmanship.
Close. They're going to take off. They're going down to the water.
So it's a beautiful view here. The boathouse is not a typical boathouse.
It's not a typical boathouse. I don't think you can get a boat in it. I think it's mostly for storage, and probably some partying went on in that house years and years ago.
Now, there are restrictions on boathouses now.
Currently, you would not be able to build a boathouse, any boathouse, right, in today's regulations.
Now, this is the majestic, beautiful side of this building.
It really is truly phenomenal with the vista down the Miles River. And as I said earlier, that a lot of the older farmhouses, I don't want to say farmhouse, but estates really weren't focused on the water. They were focused on the production on the property.
True. Now, tell me, the real story here is what happened during the Civil War.
Well, during the Civil War, and again, to back up a little bit, there were about 100 slaves on this property working the fields and taking care of everything. And although Ezekiel Kogel was not necessarily interested in slavery so
Now,
much.
he bought this in 1855?
In 1855, correct. And but he realized that we're going into the Civil War, and he really didn't support one side or the other. But being a Quaker, which are opposed to war to begin with, he did encourage the African slaves on the property to fight and
Fight for their freedom.
Fight for their freedom and fight for what was normally right. Correct. But what's really truly amazing is that upon their return after the Civil War,
So he encouraged 100 slaves. Now, this was right after Abraham Lincoln signed the Emancipation Proclamation.
Correct.
They met at Easton Point.
correct.
He must have encouraged them to go by barge down to the Easton Point to join up, and become
They
freemen.
probably went by carriage, only because that's a long way from the Miles River to Easton Point. You have to go all the way around.
Well, but true, but the bridge wasn't here then.
The bridge, but you can go the other way.
Okay.
You probably went to
So they went up.
Lombardy or-
They went a long way to seek their freedom.
Correct.
And how many slaves of the 100 took him up on it?
I believe there were 18 that, let me put it this way, there were 18 that came back. I'm sure there were more that probably didn't come back.
I researched this and found out that the number, and I believe it was 18, all that went came back.
Is that, okay, I will.
Which is amazing for that
Which
war.
is truly amazing. Now, to honor those people, Ezekiel Kogel gave each one of those people an acre of land to build a home in what is now Unionville. And he also stipulated.
Now, Unionville is a small village of a dozen or so houses that lines Miles River Neck Road, which is right up at the end of this lane.
Right up at the end of the driveway. He actually gave land from the plantation to these people.
But he couldn't deed it to them because they weren't allowed to own land.
Right, so
So he leased it to them for how much?
$1 a year.
$1 a year.
$1 a year. He helped build their houses for them, and he with one proviso that they built a schoolhouse and they built a church.
And the church still exists.
I believe that church on the Unionville Road is the same church. The schoolhouse.
I've been there, and it's a remarkable.
It's a remarkable structure.
Yeah, it really is.
The schoolhouse used to be on the Tunis Mills Road, and it was damaged by fire several years ago. So that's now gone. But it's amazing that a man of his stature could do this for 18 Union soldiers and create a village. And at one time, before it became Unionville, it was known as Kogelville.
Oh, cool. Well, he was a very brave man at the time.
Very brave man.
He could have been shot or murdered. I mean, there were a lot of... Talbot County, especially, I mean, the Eastern Shore, was split between the South and the North, but it was mostly Confederate.
Correct.
And we know that from the statue that we talked about before in the courthouse.
Correct, yes.
And the Union soldiers and the Union families were so few. Well, there were a lot. There were more Confederate than, but they were poor. Exactly. So they couldn't afford a statue.
Couldn't afford, right. That's right.
Now, is there a graveyard?
There is a graveyard. Graveyard's on the other side of the property. It's got a water view too.
Oh, great.
So
can we see it?
You want to see it? Yes. That's where Ezekiel Kogel is buried there.
And you don't have a picture of him?
I don't.
Well, that shows what kind of guy he was. He didn't want to, you know.
Quakers were not really picture people so much.
True.
Okay, more silhouettes. There might be a silhouette of him somewhere. I don't know. So there are a lot of family stories that go along with this property. One of them is, as I said, John Kemp Bartlett had 6 children, and obviously all grew up here in some form or the other. One of his daughters, my great aunt, her one child died. Her sister died. And she ended up marrying her brother-in-law in order to assist with the raising of her sister's children. So she became the stepmother to her nieces and nephew and raised them as her own.
Well, that was fairly common back in those days.
It was fairly common, but at the same time, she was still more or less the spinster aunt who never really married, so to speak.
This is also pristine back here. This is on the way to the graveyard?
This is on the way to the cemetery. So here we are at the cemetery for the Kogel family, who, as we were talking about on the other side of the house, Ezekiel Kogel was the man who so generously gave land, or leased land, to the 18 Union soldiers.
Well, they own the land now, because at the time when the law changed that African Americans and women could own property.
Correct.
Then he deeded all the land to them individually.
Them to the individual owners back then, yes. So we have Ezekiel Kogel, his wife Sarah Kogel, and their son James Kogel, and then it was my great grandfather who bought the property from James Kogel after marrying sister.
There are now, I believe, 5 generations that live in Unionville right now.
I think that's correct.
And they're very, very proud of their community.
That's you are rightly so, and they should be proud.
Well, this is a great history lesson for America.
It is, and it's right here in Talbot County, and a lot of people don't know about it.
Well, thank you so much for the tour.
I appreciate it. Thank you.